Welcome back to Conflicts of Interest. This is episode 700, and today is October 29th, 2024. I'm the host of the show, Kyle Anzalone. Sorry for getting rolling so late here for episode 700. Just spent a little extra time with a fussy baby this morning, so I was a little bit busy. But now that I have some free time, I am going to get into the news. So we have a lot to talk about on today's show. As with the first 699 episodes of Conflicts of Interest, this show is hosted at the Libertarian Institute, reposted on the blog at antiwar.com, YouTube, Rumble, or Odysee for the video version of the show. Please click the subscribe button if you haven't already. And if you're on YouTube, you got to hit that notification bell or they will not let you know when a new episode is out. Additionally, the show is up anywhere you could listen to audio podcasts. And of course, all my work is published on my Twitter feed at @KyleAnzalone_, where we are just short of 7,000 followers. So to celebrate episode 700, if you haven't yet, follow me on Twitter and help me get to 7,000 followers. All right, guys, lots of news here on today's show. Washington approves weapons sale to Riyadh following Iran-Saudi drills. So this one I wrote for the Institute on October 28th. Last week, Saudi Arabia conducted drills with its rival Iran in the Sea of Oman in a sign of warming relations between the regional powers. Following the announcement, Washington approved a massive arms sale to the Gulf Kingdom. So on Thursday, the U.S. announced it had approved the sale of 1,000 tube-launched, optically tracked, wire-guided, or TOW missiles to Saudi Arabia. Raytheon will be the contractor for the sale and will make about $440 million. Washington's press release about the deal came after Saudi Arabia said it conducted joint naval exercises with Iran on Wednesday. So a Saudi military official told the AFP, the Royal Saudi Naval Forces has recently concluded a joint naval exercise with the Iranian Naval Forces alongside other countries in the Sea of Oman. While the drills are a sign of strengthening relations between the Gulf powers, Washington providing a huge shipment of weapons to Riyadh as it also bats Israeli strikes on Iran could scuttle steps towards a more stable Iran-Saudi relationship. The White House took a similar approach in the South China Sea. In July, China and the Philippines agreed to a deal that saw tensions around the Second Thomas Shoal decrease. However, the Biden administration then sent $500 million in military aid to Manila. Shortly after, the Philippines and Chinese vessels began colliding near another reef in the South China Sea. So Riyadh and Tehran have been building their relationship since Beijing brokered a landmark peace deal between the two countries last year. President Joe Biden sought to take the Middle East in a different direction by bringing Saudi Arabia into a coalition with Israel aimed at Iran. The announcement of the massive arms deal to Riyadh comes after the arms merchant Raytheon agreed to pay nearly $1 billion in penalties after overbilling the Pentagon and bribing foreign governments. And also worth noting that our current Secretary of Defense, Lloyd Austin, is a former Raytheon executive. I'm sure once he's out of the state Defense Department, he will be back at Raytheon or a different arms maker. Next up here, this one, Dave DeCamp, October 28th, antiwar.com. Israeli Knesset passes bill to ban UN Palestinian Relief Agency. So the Israeli Knesset on Monday passed a bill that bans the UN's Palestinian Relief Agency, UNRWA, from operating inside Israel, and another that will severely limit its ability to operate inside of Gaza and the West Bank. So the legislation is expected to take effect in 90 days. The first bill banning UNRWA in Israel passed with a vote of 92-10. The second bill, aimed at ending UNRWA's operations in Israeli-occupied territories, passed on a vote of 97-9. The second bill prohibits Israeli authorities from having any contact with UNRWA, making it impossible for the relief agency to coordinate with Israel on aid deliveries. The legislation does not outline any plan to replace UNRWA's relief efforts in Gaza, which the 2 million Palestinians living there rely on. Israel has waged a war against UNRWA over the past year, killing 200 of its staff members in Israel. Israel claimed a significant number of UNRWA staff members are Hamas, but has not offered no evidence for the allegations, which have been strongly rejected by the UN agency. And what little evidence they did offer has been debunked. There was a commission done at the UN by a former French Secretary of State who debunked quite a bit of it. And then, of course, there was recently the claim that when Sinwar, the former leader of Hamas, was killed in Gaza, he was killed alongside a teacher with UNRWA, and that man actually is alive and in Egypt, so obviously he was not killed alongside Sinwar. So the U.S. took Israel's claims at face value and cut off aid to UNRWA at the beginning of the year. Now the U.S. is warning Israel against implementing the bills against UNRWA since it would starve the Palestinian civilians. The State Department spokesperson Matthew Miller said, "If UNRWA goes away, you will see civilians, including children, including babies, not be able to get access to food, water, and medicine they need to live. We find that unacceptable. We continue to urge the government of Israel to pause the implementation of this legislation. We urge them not to pass it at all, and will consider next step based on what happens in the days ahead." And of course, I think this is all just for show, because Israel has been starving, and we have seen children and babies starving in Gaza. These people, millions of them without access to food, medicine, water. All the doctors tell us this, including 100 American doctors and nurses who wrote a letter to Biden explaining all of this. And yet, the State Department hasn't taken any action, so I think this is all for show. UNRWA was formed in 1949 to aid about 750,000 Palestinians who were displaced when the State of Israel was founded in 1948, and ethnic cleansing known to the Palestinians as the Nakba. Today, Israeli ministers are calling for a new Nakba in Gaza to pave the way for Jewish settlements, and the Israeli military is currently imposing a starvation seizure on northern Gaza to forcibly displace the hundreds of thousands of civilians that have so far refused to leave. All right, this next one is from my Libertarian Institute debrief that I send out every day from the Libertarian Institute as an email. You can sign up for it at the Libertarian Institute on the homepage there. This one, Washington is funding 70% of Israel's wars. While it was never in question that the U.S. provides Israel with most of its weapons and billions of dollars in military funds, a new report by the Israeli outlet Kal Kastis revealed the shocking extent of the U.S. support. So the outlet says the scope of the American aid since the beginning of the war is about 85 billion shekels. According to estimates by the Bank of Israel, the total cost of the war is estimated at an approximate NIS 250 billion, which approximately 118 billion of those shekels is in the military cost, operational cost of the IDF for new military equipment, ammunition, and logistical support. Therefore, according to our simple calculation, the Americans finance about 70% of the war effort. However, the outlet goes on to say without the U.S. support, the war would simply not be possible. So, quote, "There is no doubt that without American aid, the government deficit for the years 2024 to 2025, which is already one of the highest in the country's history, would have increased by about 4.3% GDP, which would have made it unfinanceable. Therefore, it is doubtful whether this war could have been conducted as it is, neither in intensity nor in scope, without the American assistance." And so I write, on the U.S. taxpayers' dime, Israel has spent tens of billions of dollars deliberately reducing most of Gaza to rubble, along with much of southern Lebanon. The fact is ongoing while Americans languish from the destruction of hurricanes is simply unforgivable. We are forced to pay taxes to the U.S. American government, so if Washington is to distribute that tax money, it should go to the American people first. But Washington has sold us out for the benefit of foreign nations and arms makers who profit off their murderous and reckless policies. All right, so let's talk about the situation in Gaza here first. This one from Day to Camp, October 28th, antiwar.com. Israeli forces killed 96 Palestinians in Gaza over 48 hours. So Gaza's health ministry said Monday that its forces killed at least 96 Palestinians and wounded 277 over the previous 48-hour period. The latest violence has brought the health ministry's death toll in Gaza to 43,020, the number of wounded to 101,110. So the Telegram post for the health ministry includes a link for Palestinians to report missing family members. It said, "We call on the families of the martyrs and missing persons from the war in Gaza to complete their data by registering via the attached link to complete all the data through the Ministry of Health records." So medical sources told Al Jazeera that at least 32 people were killed in Israeli strikes on Monday, including 15 in northern Gaza, where the Israeli military is attempting to carry out ethnic cleansing campaign known as the General's Plan and has imposed a full siege, which has now entered its fourth week. The Israeli siege on northern Gaza has focused mostly on the Jabalia refugee camp and the areas around it. The Palestinian Civil Emergency Services said Monday that 100,000 Palestinians were trapped in the area without any access to medical or food supplies. Gaza's health ministry said in another statement on Monday that Israeli military operations were disrupting efforts to vaccinate children from polio. The ministry wrote, "The Israeli operation is still trying to abort the polio vaccination campaign by all means, preventing the campaign team from reaching northern Gaza and places obstacles to its implementation of Gaza City as well. Accordingly, the campaign is at risk of failure, which means the continued existence of the polio epidemic, which will not only threaten Gaza, but also threaten entire surrounding areas," the ministry added. So this is really disturbing, the extent of the damage, but this is really crazy. This is something else that Dave wrote up yesterday. Mourners eulogize Israeli soldier for its desire to take revenge against Palestinian women and children. So an Israeli soldier who was killed in Lebanon was fondly remembered at his funeral for his desire to, quote, take revenge against Palestinian women and children in Gaza. So the 22-year-old Israeli reservist and West Bank settler was killed while fighting Hezbollah last week. So his brother then at the funeral said, "You entered Gaza to take revenge as much as possible against women and children, everyone you saw, as much as possible. That's what you wanted. May the people of Israel be worthy of pursuing your vengeance, blood vengeance, not revenge by burning homes, trees, and vehicles." So a soldier delivered a eulogy at a funeral and called the dead soldier, a goofball for burning down a house in Gaza. The soldier said, "You were happiest and the biggest goofball in the platoon. We realized this for the first time when you set fire on a house on fire without approval in order to boost morale." And I mean, just wild that they're admitting to war crimes at funerals, but this is what we've really come to expect from Israeli soldiers who have largely posted their, evidence of their war crimes and the genocide they're committing in Gaza on all kinds of social media accounts just for the entire world to see. So another soldier who spoke at the funeral spoke about the deceased warmly and recalled he shot and killed Palestinians in the West Bank who was harvesting olives with his children in October of 2023. Quote, "I was so impressed with you. There were cursed olive harvesters, terrorists, and the pathetic Israeli defense forces didn't realize what was happening. You shoot, you talk, you drive them away." The speaker criticized the Israeli military for arresting the deceased soldier over the murder of the Palestinian olive harvester. He said that was despicable. They arrest you, but didn't even question the Arabs. And so the soldier who was a murderer from before October 7th, killed an olive harvester, was then, arrested, questioned for that, got out. They let him loose in Gaza where he, was bragging about all the people he was going to kill. Just a really wild look into what was happening there and how disturbing this is. All right, this next story again, Dave DeCamp, antiwar.com. Gaza ceasefire talks resume in Qatar, but progress is not expected. So on Monday, officials from the U.S., Egypt, Israel, and Qatar resumed talks on a Gaza ceasefire in Doha, but no progress is expected to be made towards a resolution ahead of the U.S. presidential election on November 5th. Sources told the New York Times that Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is waiting to see who will succeed Biden before making any diplomatic commitments. He has also made clear that he has no intentions of ending his genocidal war on Gaza, repeatedly say he would only agree to a temporary truce, but would not allow would allow Israel to resume military operations at some point. Hamas's position has been that any deal must include a permanent ceasefire and the withdrawal of Israeli forces from Gaza, but Netanyahu has insisted on keeping troops in Gaza, and his demand to maintain control over the Philadelphia corridor, which is the border between Gaza and Egypt, sabotage the latest rounds of negotiations. Earlier this month, the Haaretz report that the Israeli government wasn't interested in a new ceasefire and talks was instead focused on pursuing the annexation of the territory in Gaza. And I think a lot of times the only reason that Israelis even agree to talks at all is just to appease the Americans. All right, next up, this seems like a big deal. 7 killed as Israel launched new attacks on Lebanese city of Tyre. I've been mispronouncing it, Tyre. I guess it is pronounced Tyre, Tyre. So last week, Israel started its bombing in the ancient historical city of Tyre along the southern Lebanese coast. The attacks hit areas close to the UN World Heritage Site of the city, which includes ancient Phoenician city and Roman ruins. On Monday, saw a new round of attacks by Israeli warplanes with an immediate evacuation order for the central area of Tyre and airstrikes starting almost immediately. The attack killed at least 7 people and wounded 17 others. Israel has been issuing broad evacuation orders across all of Lebanon, impacting much of the nation's population and displacing over 1 million people so far. Today's Tyre order was unusual in its specificity, as it ordered residents to flee north to the area beyond the Awali River, and this is north, so it's nearly all the way to Beirut, which Israel does seem to be really trying to push the Lebanese citizens as far north as possible. And so those 7 weren't the only ones killed across Lebanon yesterday. This again, Jason Ditz, antiwar.com. Israel kills at least 60 in flurry of its strikes across eastern Lebanon. So Israeli evacuation orders against Lebanon escalated dramatically in recent days, and nowhere more in the eastern Bekaa Valley, where the government of the Baalbek described this as the most violent day they've seen since the beginning of the Israeli invasion. The overall death toll is continuing to rise, but right now it is at least 60 people have been killed in the strikes throughout the area in multiple cities. On Monday, a number of children were reportedly among the killed. So, just this is what's been going on in Lebanon. Israel just kind of slowly ratcheting up tensions more and more and more. All right, let's take our attention to the war in Ukraine before we wrap up here. NATO chief claims North Korean troops deployed to Russia's Kursk region. So the new NATO Secretary General, that's Mark Rutte, claimed on Monday that North Korean troops have been deployed to Russia's Kursk Oblast, where Ukrainian forces hold a small piece of territory and are slowly being pushed out by Russian troops. The Secretary General did not say the soldiers were involved in combat, but his comments back claims made by Ukrainian President Zelensky about North Korean troops being present in Kursk. Threat Ukraine has been hyping up to try to gain support from its Western backers. The Secretary General previously denied Ukrainian claims that North Korean troops are fighting in the war. Again, the fact that they said they're not actually on the front lines makes me think that my original prediction is correct, that there's probably some North Koreans somewhere in Russia, but not in any substantial numbers and not doing the fighting. Interesting to note, and this is something I picked up from our friends over at Anti-Empire, Marco Marianovich, and he wrote that during the BRICS summit, one of the things that Putin really put emphasis on was that there is this mutual defense pact with North Korea and that he could invoke it, but he didn't say that he had already done so. And so the implication was, we haven't taken this step yet, but we could. All right, next up here, this is why I wrote for the Libertarian Institute on the 27th. Department of Defense review finds half of all weapons sent to Ukraine lacked documentation. So the Department of Defense Inspector General reviewed hundreds of weapon shipments to Ukraine, finding that half lacked proper documentation. The report released by the Pentagon IG on October 18th examined hundreds of arms transfers to Ukraine that occurred in the first months after the Russian invasion in 2022. The arms transfer totaled $2.1 billion. The investigation found that over 50%, $1.1 billion of the weapon shipments to Kiev lacked the required paperwork. The study is not the first to review arms transfers to Ukraine to find that the Pentagon's documentation falls short of requirements. The IG has claimed that the lack of training and a rush to get weapons to Ukraine are the cause for the lack of proper documentation. The report says the quick reaction led to a breakdown in internal controls. Over the past 2.5 years, Washington has lavished Kiev with around $60 billion in military aid. It's unclear if the Pentagon has improved its documentation of weapons transfers. My guess is that the answer is probably not. All right, wrapping up the show here for today with this one from Dave, antiwar.com, October 27th. U.S. approves $2 billion in new arms deal for Taiwan. So on Friday, the State Department approved 2 potential arms deals for Taiwan worth about $2 billion, which drew a sharp rebuke from China. The Pentagon's Defense Security Cooperation Agency, the DSCA, said one of the deals is for 3 national advanced surface-to-air missile systems and related equipment, and which will cost about $1.6 billion. The other deal is for radar systems worth about $128 million. The approval for the arms sales begins with a period where Congress could potentially block the deals, but that never happens. In response to the approval of the arms sales, a Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson said that China strongly condemns and firmly opposes it and has lodged solemn representations with the U.S. and warned that Beijing will take all necessary measures to firmly defend national sovereignty, security, and territorial integrity. So the U.S. has been doing this throughout the Biden administration and the Trump administration too, but particularly the Biden administration, just lavishing Taiwan with weapons, and new under the Biden administration at the cost of U.S. taxpayers, rather than just saying, here, you are welcome to buy our weapons. We're actually providing Taiwan with American weapons free of charge. And this has been seen as particularly provocative from Beijing's standpoint because, of course, China and Taiwan view all of China, mainland and Taiwan, as a single political entity. And so in Taiwan, the direction has been more towards independence and the island becoming separate from China. And of course, China views this as losing a major part of its sovereignty and a major part of its territory. And so Beijing, I think, is prepared to do a lot to prevent that from happening. I think the first move wouldn't necessarily be an all-out war, would just be to blockade the island. But giving Taiwan these weapons as its leadership continues to make statements that are pro-independence is highly provocative from Beijing's perspective, and could lead to a lot of problems in the region. All right, everybody, that's where I'm going to wrap up the show today. Thank you all so much for tuning in. We'll be back with more tomorrow.